Greetings. This is Father Harvey Henderson at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Grand Forks. I'm continuing with my summer preaching series about the children of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. To date, we've had a look at the call of Abraham and Sarah in chapter 12, where the story begins, and there's a promise of land and descendants and a blessing through which all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Sarah and Abraham are elderly and typically beyond the age of childbearing, but God promises them a son. Sarah doubts this and even laughs at God's suggestion of this, so she gives Hagar, her servant, to Abraham as a wife, and Hagar conceives a child whose name is Ishmael. Later on, then, Sarah does indeed conceive and bear a son whose name is Isaac. Sarah becomes jealous of the relationship and fears that Ishmael may take over her son's place as the heir, so she has Abraham cast Hagar and Ishmael out into the wilderness. God intervenes and provides water for them and promises them that from them a great nation will arise. And in the Islamic tradition, it is through Ishmael that the Muslim people trace their ancestry back to Abraham. So we pick up the story then afterwards that Abraham is tested by God ordering him to sacrifice his son Isaac. This is a difficult story to understand, and some folks have even suggested that God continues to test us. I'm not sure that that is true. We do pray occasionally in the Episcopal Church that God does not willingly afflict the children of human beings. So our thinking about that has indeed changed. So today we move into the second generation to find a wife for Isaac, and this is the story in chapter 24. Three times in the story leading up to today's reading, we have this term steadfast love, where God has this steadfast love for his people. And this steadfast love is the love that endures through all situations. We've seen already that it is a frail and human folks who are called to follow in the traditions of Abraham, and God works out the plan of salvation in spite of our human weakness and sin. So this is an important piece of the story. This steadfast love of God. Steadfastness is this idea of God continuing to love us again in spite of our human weakness. So we pick up the story today where Abraham sends his servant back to his homeland because he doesn't want Isaac to take a wife from amongst the Canaanites where the people are living, because they are indeed not the descendants, not part of the family of God. So the servant is sent with a mission back to the homeland to find a wife for Isaac. So the story today has the servant's prayer, which tells us about this idea that he wants Isaac to have a wife from amongst his own people. So the servant is sent with a lot of camels and things as a gift, perhaps for the family of the wife to be. It was common practice then to pay a kind of dowry for the family to whom one takes a wife. So much of today's reading has to deal with the servant's prayer. He is kind of the chief character in today's reading. So the servant prays that when he journeys there, that his camels and he are in need of water. So he prays that the woman who comes out to provide water for them might indeed be the one to whom Isaac will be married. Well, the woman who comes out is indeed Rebekah, and we can look at the genealogy. Rebekah is indeed a descendant of Abraham through his brother. So he's actually, she is actually a distant cousin of Isaac, and this wasn't uncommon in the world, in that part of the world, in that particular time. So indeed, Rebekah does agree to go back with the servant to the land where Isaac is living, and there's a rather touching story. She sees him from a distance, and they fall in love with one another, and Isaac then takes one of his kinswoman as his wife. So an important part of the story here, continuing into this second generation. So Rebekah then continues this idea of the faithful response of leaving home and family that furthers God's purposes. Remember, in the beginning of the story, Abraham and Sarah were called to move from their homeland to go to a land which God would show them. They have no idea where this land is. They ask no questions. They simply pack up their stuff and go, a faithful response. Rebekah does the same thing here. She's not sure where it is indeed she's going, or who is this man that she has indeed agreed to marry. So the motive here, the theme throughout this particular part of the story is that of God's divine guidance. God continues to work out the plan of salvation. It's important to note that the prayers in this particular passage are both prayers of petition, asking God for things, and also prayers of thanksgiving. So we see God here as the creator, and God as the creator working again through ordinary, everyday human beings, as God continues to do with us in the world in which we live. So the servant's prayer is a rather spontaneous response to God in this petition again, and thanksgiving arising from the natural expression of life with God. So Rebekah loves Isaac, we're told, toward the end of the story, and God's creation, God's divine promise, continues then that through Abraham and Sarah, there will be this chosen people. So Isaac becomes the second generation of these particular this particular people of God. So once again, this idea of steadfast love is important in all of this. Let's have a little closer look at the servant's speech and these particular things. He says, Master Abraham says to him, go to my father's house, to my kindred, to get a wife for my son Isaac, again, because he didn't want Isaac to marry from amongst the Canaanites who were foreigners. So today's prayer again from the servant says, let the woman who comes out and gives me water be the one. So this is rather strange tradition. He has a ring that he puts in her nose and bracelets on her arms, and then goes back to her family to, in a sense, ask permission to take her in marriage. So they call Rebekah, and again ask Rebekah if she will go with this man, and Rebekah replies, I will. Again, like Abraham and Sarah in the beginning of the story. So they bless Rebekah and pray for her. May you go now, our sister, and may you bear thousands of myriads. May your offspring gain possession of the gates of their enemies. Well, remember the promise that God made to Abraham and Sarah in the beginning of the story, in chapter 12 of Genesis, that there would be an abundance of descendants of God's people. And we find, by the end of the Genesis story, there are indeed 66, I think is the number we talked about a few weeks ago, of those particular descendants. And then may you gain possession of the gates of their enemies. In other words, may you possess the land that God has indeed promised to you. Now, it would be several hundred years, actually, not until the time of David, and about 1,000 years before the time of Jesus, that the land was finally secure. But here, in the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, we have this promise continuing, thousands of descendants, and giving them the land of their enemies. So again, this rather touching scene towards the end of it. Isaac is out for an evening walk, and as they journey back, again with the servant of Abraham, Rebekah saw him from a distance and asked the servant who indeed was this young man, and the servant replies, "That is indeed my master." So Isaac takes Rebekah, becomes his wife, and we're told he loved her, and Isaac comforted her. So the story at this point is now moving to the second generation. Isaac, the child of Abraham and Sarah, who conceive him in their old age. So important themes again in this part are in the preamble to this particular story, God's steadfast love, God's promise to remain faithful to his promise to provide a land and children and a blessing to Abraham and Sarah and their descendants. And this idea of steadfast love is what sets up today's part of the story. Just one quick personal story. When I think of steadfastness, I think of my parents who grew up in the same house, married to each other for 40 years. My dad did the same job as a firefighter in Winnipeg for 39 years. So they lived in the same house, married to one another, did the same job. And through all that time, my mother was the chief engineer of our household, raising 6 children in that particular neighborhood. So I think of steadfastness, continuing along the same path, doing the same thing for long periods of time. So this is a good way to describe God's relationship with the chosen people, and indeed God's relationship with us to this present day. God continues in this idea of steadfast love for us. So in spite of the darkness that might appear to be in the world in which we live, we still have this idea of hopefulness that God is indeed working out the plan of salvation and working out that plan through you and I. We've had a number of baptisms here at St. Paul's in the last several months, and when we do those baptisms, we provide a candle from the Jesus candle that is lit. And so this is a symbol of hopefulness that God will continue to work out the plan of salvation. Each time a child is baptized and given this particular light, the world becomes a bit of a better place. And we continue to pray that God will send them out, these young people, when they grow older, as witnesses to the love of God for God's chosen people. So here again we move into the second generation, the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah. Next week we'll look at the third generation, at the children of Isaac and Rebekah. So hope you're enjoying the series. Take care and God bless.